I never imagined studying a thought like this. It feels heavy even as it forms, not because I'm afraid, but because it carries a kind of honesty I've avoided before. Final words don't rush, they don't shout. They sit quietly waiting for you to be ready to tell the truth without trying to soften it. It's late again, a familiar late where the world feels distant and everything important feels closer than usual. I didn't come here to be dramatic. I came here because some nights don't let you sleep until you listen to what your heart has been holding back. If these were my final words, I wouldn't talk about achievements. I wouldn't list milestones or explain myself. I wouldn't defend my choices. I would only want one thing to be clear. I would want to be known who my heart chose and why. Not because the choice was perfect, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. I've lived long enough to know that the loudest loves are not always the deepest ones. Some loves announce themselves everywhere. They demand attention. They take up space and then they leave, often without warning, leaving behind questions and noise and confusion. What stayed with me wasn't loud like that. What stayed with me was quiet, persistent, steady in a way that didn't need proof. It didn't rush me. It didn't pressure me. It didn't ask me to become someone else to be worthy of it. That's how I knew. I used to think love would feel like certainty all the time, like confidence without corrects. But real love, the kind that matters when everything else falls away, feels more like clarity than certainty. You don't know every outcome, but you know the direction. My heart chose direction over excitement, truth over performance, depth over appearance. There were moments when I questioned myself, moments when the world's voice felt louder than my own, moments when it would have been easier to choose what looked right instead of what felt right. Those moments don't disappear just because love is real, but every time I listened closely, every time the noise settled, the answer was the same. I didn't choose her because she completed me. I chose her because I didn't have to shrink around her. I didn't have to explain why I'm quiet sometimes. I didn't have to hide the parts of me that aren't impressive. There's a freedom in being chosen without being evaluated. And there's a responsibility in choosing someone with care. If these were my final words, I would want you to understand that my heart didn't choose based on convenience. It didn't choose based on timing or pressure or fear of being alone. It chose based on recognition. Recognition is subtle. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with relief. Relief that you don't have to keep searching. Relief that you can stop performing. Relief that something finally feels like it belongs without effort. I remember the first time I felt that relief. It wasn't during a big moment. It was during something ordinary. A conversation that didn't need to go anywhere. A silence that didn't feel awkward. A presence that didn't ask anything of me. That's what stayed. I've been loved before, or at least I've been wanted. There's a difference. Wanting is hungry. Loving is patient. Wanting needs reassurance. Loving offers steadiness. My heart chose steadiness. There were days when I tried to talk myself out of it. Days when logic tried to take over. Days when I asked myself if choosing quiet meant I was settling. But settling feels heavy. This didn't. This felt lighter even when I carried weight. If these were my final words, I would want you to know that my heart didn't choose perfection. It chose truth. It chose someone who knows how to stay when things aren't shiny. Someone who doesn't confuse silence with distance. Someone who understands that presence doesn't always look like words. I chose the one who saw me when I wasn't trying to be seen. And that choice changed how I understand love. Love, I learned, isn't proven in moments of intensity. It's proven in consistency, in the way someone shows up when there's nothing to gain, in the way they protect what's fragile instead of testing it. If these were my final words, I wouldn't ask for understanding. I wouldn't ask for approval. I would only ask that this choice not be misinterpreted. My heart didn't choose quickly. It chose carefully after disappointment, after confusion, after learning what doesn't last. It chose after learning how to be alone without becoming closed. There's a strange peace that comes when you stop needing love to save you, when you stop asking it to fill gaps you haven't faced yet. That peace is what allowed me to choose freely, not desperately. And freedom changes everything about love. I didn't choose her because I was afraid of losing her. I chose her because I respected what we could build together without fear driving it. That matters. If these were my final words, I would want you to know that my heart didn't chase, it waited. And waiting refined it. It stripped away illusions. It clarified priorities. It taught me that real love doesn't rush you toward the future. It walks with you in the present. I don't know how long anyone gets. None of us do. But I know that if my voice went quiet tomorrow, I would want it to be remembered that I loved honestly, not loudly, not perfectly, honestly. That my heart chose someone not for who she could be, but for who she already was. That it chose peace over performance, safety over spectacle, home over noise. If these were my final words, they wouldn't be instructions. There would be confirmation, confirmation that love doesn't need to be complicated to be deep, that the right choice doesn't always feel exciting, but it feels right in a way that doesn't fade. And if you're listening to this, maybe you're holding something similar inside you. A truth you haven't said out loud because it feels too fragile to expose. A choice you've made quietly without witnesses. That doesn't make it less real. Some of the most important decisions are the ones we make without an audience. This isn't an ending. It's a beginning of understanding of what it means to choose with intention instead of fear. If these were my final words, they would be simple. Never forget who my heart chose, because I never will. There's something that happens after you admit a truth like that. Even if you only admit it to yourself, the world doesn't change. Nothing dramatic shifts. But you start moving through things differently, like you're carrying something fragile and you don't want to drop it by being careless. I noticed how my thoughts slowed down. I wasn't rushing to conclusions anymore. I wasn't replaying conversations to see if I missed something. I wasn't imagining alternate versions of my life just to feel in control. My mind felt quieter, not empty, just settled in a way that felt unfamiliar. For a long time, I lived as if clarity was something you arrive at through effort, through analysis, through asking the right questions enough times. But this didn't come from effort. It came from letting go of the need to be certain before choosing. That was new for me. I've always trusted my ability to think my way through things. Logic felt safer than feeling. If something went wrong, I could explain it. If something hurt, I could justify it. But love doesn't respond to explanation the way problems do. It responds to attention, to care, to patience. Once my heart chose, I stopped asking it to defend itself. That doesn't mean doubts disappeared. They just lost their authority. Doubt still showed up, but it didn't get to make decisions anymore. It didn't get to rewrite what felt true just because it was loud. I think that's an important shift people don't talk about. Real love doesn't silence doubt. It teaches you how to listen without obeying it. There are moments when the weight of that choice felt heavy, not because it was wrong, but because it mattered. Anything that matters carries weight. That weight makes you careful. It makes you intentional. I started noticing how my actions adjusted without me forcing them to. I became more consistent, more present, less reactive. I didn't disappear into distraction when things felt quiet. I stayed with the moment even when I was uncomfortable. That staying was unfamiliar. In the past, I confused movement with progress. If something felt uncertain, I moved. If something felt vulnerable, I changed the subject. If something asked too much of me emotionally, I found a way to avoid it without admitting that's what I was doing. This time I didn't want to run, not because I was brave, but because running no longer felt like relief. It felt like loss. I also became aware of how much of my life had been shaped by other people's expectations, not intentionally, subtly, through what was praised, what was rewarded, what was considered successful. Choosing quietly means disappointing those expectations. Sometimes it means letting people misunderstand you. It means not correcting every assumption. That was harder than I thought it would be, but every time I felt the urge to explain myself, I asked a simpler question. Does this explanation protect something real, or does it just protect my image? Most of the time it was the second, so I stayed quiet. That quiet wasn't withdrawal, it was alignment. I didn't need external agreement to validate an internal truth. I also realized how much tenderness real love requires. Not the soft romantic kind people talk about, but the disciplined kind. The kind that notices your tone. The kind that chooses restraint. The kind that pauses before speaking when words could wound something delicate. Tenderness like that isn't instinctive, it's learned. And it's learned when you finally care enough about the outcome to slow down. I began to understand why my heart had to go through disappointment before it could choose properly. Disappointment stripped away my appetite for drama. It made me allergic to inconsistency. It sharpened my awareness of what drains me versus what grounds me. Before, I might have called that pickiness. Now, I see all at discernment. There's a difference between closing yourself off and becoming selective. Closing off is fear. Selectivity is respect. Respect for yourselves. Respect for the other person. My heart didn't choose because it was desperate. It chose because it recognized safety. Safety doesn't mean comfort all the time. It means knowing that when discomfort comes, it won't be used against you. It means knowing that silence won't be weaponized, that honesty won't be punished. Those things matter more than attraction ever did. I used to think love was about how much you could feel. Now I think it's about how much you can trust what you feel without losing yourself. That kind of trust doesn't come quickly. It's built through repetition, through small moments handled well, through consistency that doesn't need applause. I noticed how my expectations softened, not lowered, clarified. I wasn't projecting futures or demanding certainty. I was paying attention to the present, to how things actually were, not how I hoped they'd become. That made everything feel more real. There were days when fear tried to reassert itself, days when old habits whispered that I should keep options open, stay flexible, avoid commitment just in case. Those habits had protected new ones, but they were no longer serving me. Protection and avoidance can look very similar until you outgrow one of them. I also thought a lot about legacy, not in the sense of being remembered by many, but in the sense of being known by one, where it means to be chosen deeply by someone who sees you clearly. That kind of being known requires courage. It means letting someone witness you without editing the parts you see NK are inconvenient. My heart didn't choose someone who needed me to be impressive. It chose someone who allowed me to be honest. Honesty feels risky, till you realize how much energy dishonesty consumes. I stopped spending energy maintaining an image. I redirected it towards showing up consistently. That shift didn't make life easier, but it made it cleaner. Clean is underrated. Clean doesn't mean simple. It means fewer hidden costs, fewer emotional debts, fewer conversations you replay later, wishing you'd been braver. As time passed, I noticed something else. I wasn't afraid of endings the way I used to be, not because I stopped caring, but because I trusted myself to survive honestly if something didn't last. That trust made me more open, not less. I think that's another reason the heart chooses quietly when it's ready. It doesn't need guarantees, it needs integrity. Integrity means acting in alignment with what you know is true, even when outcomes are uncertain. That's what clears throat this feels like. Um, I don't know where this leads in detail. I don't know where this leads in detail. I don't need to. I know how I'm showing up now. And I know that I'm no longer betraying myself to avoid discomfort. If these were my final words, I would want it known that my heart chose with care. Not out of fear, not out of loneliness, but out of clarity, earned through waiting. Waiting didn't harden me, it refined me, and that refinement made the choice possible. There's a stillness that settles in after you stop arguing with yourself, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels complete enough to rest in. I think that's where I am now, not because every question has been answered, but because I've stopped demanding answers before I'm willing to live them. I don't replay the past the way I used to. Not because it doesn't matter anymore, but because it no longer has authority over the present. I can acknowledge my hurt without letting it decide what I choose next. That's a quiet strength I didn't have before. I've learned that love doesn't ask you to forget who you were. It asks you to understand why you had to become that person in the first place. Every disappointment shaped something useful. Every ending taught me where I bend and where I break. None of it was wasted. If these really were my final words, I wouldn't want them to sound like regret disguised as wisdom. I wouldn't want them to sound like someone looking back with distance. I'd want them to sound like truth spoken from inside the moment. The truth is choosing someone with your heart isn't a single decision. It's a series of small, consistent ones. Is choosing to listen when it would be easier to withdraw. Choosing to stay present when distraction is tempting. Choosing honesty when silence would protect you from vulnerability. That's what this has taught me. I no longer believe love is proven by intensity. I believe it's proven by endurance, by what remains after novelty fades, by how two people handle the ordinary days when nothing dramatic happens. Those days used to scare me. Now I see them as the foundation. I don't need love to rescue me from myself. I needed to meet me where I already am. And that requires me to show up without armor, without rehearsed versions of myself. Just present. Presence is costly. It asks for attention. It asks for patience. It asks you to put down the habits that once protected you and trust that you don't need them anymore. That's not easy, but it's honest. I think about how much quieter my inner world has become since I stopped resisting this truth. The absence of constant evaluation, the relief of not needing to impress, the freedom of letting something be what it is instead of what it could become if I controlled it hard enough. Control was never love. It was fear trying to stay busy. I don't want to live that way anymore. If these were my final words, I'd want it understood that my heart didn't choose recklessly. It shows after learning how fragile people can be, after learning how easily words can wound, after learning how careful you have to be with something that actually matters, that care has changed how I move through everything else. I speak more deliberately. I listen longer. I pause before reacting. Those changes didn't come from discipline. They came from respect. Respect for myself. Respect for the other person. Respect for the space between us. I don't feel the need to make promises I can't keep. I don't feel the urge to declare certainty where they're still unfolding. I trust that showing up consistently says more than grand statements ever could. There's a humility in that, a willingness to let time reveal what words can't. I used to believe clarity meant knowing exactly where something was going. Now I think clarity means knowing how you're willing to show up regardless of where it leads. That's the clarity I have now. I know how I want to love. I know how I want to be loved. I know what I'm longer willing to compromise. And I know that choosing peace over performance doesn't mean sing less. It means choosing deeper. If these were my final words, they wouldn't be dramatic. They wouldn't try to leave an impression. They would simply tell the truth. My heart chose quietly, carefully, without witnesses, without applause. And I stand by that choice, not because it guarantees anything, but because it reflects who I am now. I'm no longer interested in being understood by everyone, and I'm interested in being known by the one who matters. That shift changes how much weight other opinions carry. They don't disappear, they just don't lead. I think that's what maturity feels like. Not confidence without doubt, but conviction that doesn't panic when doubt appears. I don't need to convince the world that this choice was right. I only need to live it honestly. And if someone misunderstands that, I can let them. Some truths are meant to be defended. They're meant to be lived quietly until they speak for themselves. If you're listening to this and you feel that familiar tightness in your chest, that sense that something you chosen quietly might never be fully understood, I want you to know you're not wrong for protecting it. Not everything real needs to be loud. Some of the most meaningful decisions you'll ever make will happen in silence, without permission, without validation, without a guarantee that doesn't make them weaker. It makes them yours. If these were my final words, they would be simple. Even if they had time to say, I chose with intention, I chose with care, I chose with a heart that had been broken enough to know what mattered and healed enough to recognize it when it arrived. And whatever happens next, I won't forget that. Because my heart didn't see who's lightly. It chose truth. There's something I didn't say yet. Not because I didn't know it, but because I wasn't ready to sit with it fully. Some truths don't reveal themselves all at once. They wait until you've said enough to finally say the rest. I